So I'd like to introduce then Stuart Field, who is just a superb, amongst other things, comparativist, and he's going to talk about youth justice in Wales, or Welsh youth justice, relations between policy and practice.
Okay, so I wanted to try and address this question of interprofessional dynamics with a slightly different kind of angle. We've been talking about how practitioners interact. I want to try and talk about the way in which policy and practice interact, the way in which they come together. And I want to use the example of youth justice in Wales. And the backdrop to this is that I've been asked to write a chapter in a book by somebody called Martin Wazick about the criminal justice policy making in general. And what he wanted me to talk about was the Welsh dimension to criminal justice policy making, which may sound a bit esoteric to those who are not within the UK. But as you may know, we are in a devolution process. And so one of the issues that's arising is the extent to which the criminal justice, and specifically youth justice in Wales, is or may become different from youth justice in England. Okay, and hence we often refer to this idea of dragonisation. Okay, the dragon is the symbol of Wales, and there's a kind of evoking of this idea of tartanisation, which were in relation to Scotland, that Scotland had become different from the rest of the UK, was asserting its distinctiveness. Well, dragonisation is something that's been evoked by one or two people. And so hence, I think one of the reasons why I was asked to talk about this was because of this notion, well, are the Welsh different? And more particularly, how are they different? Because I think I'm probably quite sceptical, whereas the story is we are different and for important reasons. So I'm going to use the example of youth justice as a place to look at the relationship between policy and practice. And in particular, one ought to mention the fact that the youth justice system in both England and Wales is essentially the same in terms of the legislative framework. And yet, it is said that there are very different inflections to that policy, and specifically that the Welsh version of youth justice is much more oriented towards welfare and rights. So that's the kind of the Welsh dimension. But one of the things that Martin Wazick wanted us to think about was the usefulness, the usefulness and the merits of two different ways of looking at the relationship between policy and practice. On one hand, the idea of a top-down version in which policy is created politically and then driven down to practitioners on the ground. And the other is a more free-floating situation where practice is negotiated between policymakers and practitioners, and that it's a set of interactions, so going both ways. And so, essentially, which of those seems to fit reality better, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of each? Now, I suspect that he has asked me to do this because of a piece of work that I've done in the past, which was based on essentially a study of youth justice culture in South Wales. So it's based on lots of case file analysis, 250 cases, 55 interviews with practitioners based in South Wales. And this was, or at least the empirical data, was drawn from the period 2002 to 2004, which is significant because this is the period when what we think of as the new youth justice was embedded already and was developing. And the new youth justice is, if you like, a manifestation of New Labour, and is an approach to youth justice which is much more oriented towards early and progressive intervention through the criminal justice system. And also it's associated with the rise of the use of new public management techniques, key performance indicators, audit, inspection. So in some ways it's seen as a manifestation by many academics as what's bad about top-down policy, because not only was it driven by politics, The new youth justice emerges from the Jamie Bulger affair. It emerges from a competition between Labour and Conservative over toughness. But also, it's something that was implanted into a culture which grew up in the 1980s from the ground up, of youth justice practitioners getting together, police officers and social workers, developing informal diversionary systems, informal interventions, keeping kids out of the system. So, manifestly, you think this is top down, this is bad, this is what you're going to see. But of course, when I went there, one of the things that, when I interviewing, looking at the case files, the story that I told in those early publications was one of continuing complexity and negotiation. That there was still a lot of negotiation by practitioners around the fundamental aims of the system. What are we trying to do? What are the means that we should use? Speaking to them, there was clearly, for example, a great deal of perceived capacity to continue to talk about need, whereas the system was trying to make them think about risk. The move towards actuarial-based, risk-based assessment. But you talk to them, and they're talking about need and about the idea that they have reconfigured welfare to answer some of these requirements. So, practitioners really showing much more autonomy than I would have expected from the stereotype. And the second is that practice on the ground emerging from a very complex interaction between youth offending teams. Youth offending teams are multidisciplinary teams of social workers, probation workers, police, health and education, brought together, and they're the advisors of the sentences, who are lay magistrates within our system. But they're also the people who are delivering the interventions within the community. And so what you found was that they were negotiating very strongly with local police forces. And remember, 4 different police forces in Wales, and lots of different benches. Both the police and the local magistrates asserting a strong degree of local autonomy. So it's all about how you build your relationship with locally on the ground with your local sentences. So this is not at all what the image of the new youth justice was deriving down from the politically imposed solutions. But I said, well, is that likely to be because I'm in Wales? And I said, well, I'm not so sure, because these are entrenched features of the system. Who gets to determine what kind of interventions you provide? Who decides about financing? This is all done very locally. And if you look at the legislative framework, it's actually not very dictatorial. And so I said, well, I'm not sure whether this is anything special to Wales. They talk about welfare a lot. They're clearly social work oriented. And very interestingly, somebody called Mark Drakeford, who is both youth justice man and now a big politician in Wales, then used my evidence to suggest, yes, this is dragonisation. This is us being different from the nasty neoliberals in England. So that then alerted me to the idea, well, maybe there might be a little bit of aspiration behind this whole concept of dragonisation. So, and this is part of, I suppose, a broader interest in what's happening in terms of criminal justice and how we should characterise change. Because there is a tendency, or has been a tendency, to present the emergence of the new penalty. So risk-based ideas driven by actuarial techniques, as if this is suddenly taken over in some very profound way and replaced everything that went before. Whereas I think there are others, and I think I would align myself with people like Goldson and Hughes and Gray, who are emphasising, well, actually, if you look at things on the ground, certainly youth justice, community service, safety, is still very much about practitioners negotiating. And that as a result, some of the kinds of complexity in the discourses, how you manage need against risk, welfare, punishment, all of these old kinds of dichotomies, they haven't gone away and they're still there. So that's the kind of background. Now, if we say, well, how does this debate about modes of policy formation and implementation relate to an argument about the distinctiveness of Wales? Now, okay, some of the backdrop. The Government of Wales Act 1998 and 2006 creates a system of devolution whereby certain matters are specified to be matters for the Welsh Government. Okay, so it's not like Scotland, where Scotland has, well, Westminster reserves certain matters and everything else is for the Scottish Parliament. Ours is a conferred powers model, where the Act says the Welsh Government can pass legislative measures in relation to A, B, C, D, E, F, and the Welsh Government has administrative command of those things. Now, where does youth justice sit with this? Well, rather uneasily, in fact, because policing is not devolved to Wales, the court system is not devolved to Wales, so the youth court isn't devolved, but all the social services that go to supporting a youth offending team, like health, education, social services, they are all devolved matters. So you create this kind of rather difficult process. And that raises the question, well, how do you coordinate? And of course that pressure on coordination becomes even greater in Wales, because ever since the Welsh Government existed, more or less, it has begun to carve out a kind of distinctive image vis-à-vis children. That is to say, to emphasise the primacy of welfare of children, and to try and, if you like, blend a discourse built around welfare with a discourse built around rights. And this, Wales, of course, will never, I predict, ever elect a Conservative government, simply because of the way that the demographics are built up. So some of those kinds of notions of individualism, Welsh people try to tell themselves that they're a bit more community oriented, a bit more social democratic, if you like. And that has resulted in a document which was agreed by the Youth Justice Board and the Welsh Government. Now, okay, where's the Youth Justice Board? The Youth Justice Board is another of these complications, because it is a quasi-autonomous body that was set up with the new Youth Justice in 2000. And it's a body which, if you like, monitors, finances to a significant extent, sets targets for youth justice in England and Wales. So it is an England and Wales body. So you have all these complexities. Lots of the services are being delivered through devolved matters. Some of them are not. You have a monitoring body that is England and Wales. How do you deal with this? Well, the answer was that they got together and they created something called the All Wales Youth Offending Strategy, which is a document which treads very subtly. It plays all the notes, the black notes and the white notes, the major and the minor. So we have there's a bit which says people that come into the system are children first and offenders afterwards. And then you have the bit that says, yes, but early intervention is essential to prevent offending. And okay. So you're playing the new youth justice tune, but you're also playing the nice Welsh tune. So we have a number of difficulties here. We have what we can best describe as a set of coordinate decision-making structures, in which the lay magistrates are over here, the police are over here, both of them claiming local autonomy. The yachts are here, and it's the yachts which get to decide how what to deliver. You have this division of political responsibilities across London and Cardiff. And what that has done has very much created a process by which policy has to be negotiated, so that we have generated a number of new institutions, or distinct institutions. Like there is a division of the Youth Justice Board which is called the Youth Justice Board Cymru, which is a little group of facilitators. Do you want me to pause?
Good idea, I think.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, everyone.
James.
Can we resume? Thank you, Stuart, for.
D'accord.
Oh, is it still on?
Okay.
So let's continue. Sorry about the intermission there.
No problem. I often have big interruptions in my chain of thought, but that's probably one of the after a big pause. Okay, what I'm setting up then is, what we're interested in is the relationship between policy and practice and how we should conceive that, and what is different about Wales. And I'm kind of setting up the idea that negotiation might be something that creates distinctiveness in Wales. You have to get that so I can knock it down at the end. Okay? So you have to be drawn into that idea. So coordinate decision-making structures, I suppose, it's evoking Damaska, who contrasted the idea that within Anglo-American criminal justice systems, we tend to have lots of different agencies dancing with each other and nobody being able to tell each other what to do. In contrast to his, perhaps a stereotype of continental jurisdictions where you have much more clearly hierarchical driving down. So we have that. We have this division of responsibilities, and of course, what we're setting up is the idea that the policy is being driven in a way from London to Cardiff by this process, by the need to agree, which is a political need, and not just to agree a strategy. Once you've agreed the strategy, you need to have some institutions to make some sense of this allegedly distinctive approach. So you have the Youth Justice Board has a lot of divisions, and it has the Youth Justice Board Cymru as a division which exists in a way that none of the regions of England have a division. They don't have their own division. Why? Because the idea is that this is a policy-making body, if you like, or was part of the negotiation of policy. On that Youth Justice Board, you have a number of ex-practitioners from the Youth Justice Board. You also have something called the Wales Youth Justice Advisory Panel, which draws all the key players from probation, from health, from education, from yachts, representative yachts, all in this particular a panel which advises both the Youth Justice Board Cymru and the Welsh Government as to how to implement youth justice. And you have another committee, which is a committee of the Welsh Government and a committee of the Youth Justice Board, to superintend implementation, setting targets. Okay, so you create distinct institutions because you are creating a bespoke approach. That's the idea, and that this has to be built around negotiation. Now, the question is, does this create a particular opportunity to negotiate the formation and the implementation of a policy? And does it change the relationship between policy and practice, or policy makers and practitioners? Because one of the things this is doing is, of course, it's changing the scale at which policy is made. For example, there are around 140 youth offending teams in England and Wales. There are 18 in Wales. So literally, you can get. We could have all the youth offending team managers in this room. The Youth Justice Board Cymru has 10 full-time employees converting or negotiating the distance between English or the new Youth Justice and the Welsh version. And so you speak to people like the head of the Youth Justice Board Wales, and he says, well, the key thing is I both have access to power that I wouldn't normally have. I can talk to people in the Welsh Government, it's very, very easy to do, and I have access to practice in a way that's much easier because those 18 yacht managers, they've created their own thing called Yacht Managers Cymru, and a very solid. There's one holdout. There's only 17 yacht managers in it, but so you can have a dialogue between the two. So you have things like a Wales practice development panel, whereby they try and pick new bits of practice which are being developed in one part of Wales and assess them and disseminate them. And this is a very intimate process. And you have the development of, and that panel develops new initiatives. Like the latest thing is that they're having a new case management project. How you should case manage very complex cases, very difficult individuals with long offending records. And I was at a seminar last week, and the Youth Justice Board Cymru Wales head was talking about this new project. And I suggested to him, part of what was going on was he was selling this to the yachts. And the yacht manager said to me, no. We have been involved in the production of this. We were part of the process of producing. So you have this opportunity really to have practice and policy making. Who is the practitioner? Who is the policy maker? I mean, they all deny that they're policy makers. The head denies that he makes policy because he wants to see himself as negotiating and not imposing. So all of that looks, looks very nice, doesn't it? We think that's all very nice. Negotiating with practitioners, getting a nice, distinctive welfare and rights. It's a very nice story, and it's a story that we're beginning to tell strongly in Wales of dragonisation. What makes us different from those nasty neoliberals in England? And hence, two examples are the development of what's called the Swansea Bureau in Swansea, as you can probably imagine. City in the west, where essentially back to informal interventions, back to diverting people away, similarly triage, different version of the same kind of front-end diversionary process. And we're all very proud of these things coming out of Wales. Now, the problem is that all that tells us is that we like negotiating practice. But of course, and that this is going to promote something that's Welsh-wide. Problem is that, of course, the possibilities for negotiation go way below the level of Wales, because it still remains the same. Remember, I said coordinate decision-making structures. Who gets to decide what kinds of interventions you're going to use? The yacht does. What kinds of programs? Who gets to decide how you finance a yacht? The local authority. There are 22 local authorities. Who gets to decide where the yachts sit within the local authorities? Are they within children's service or are they not? Each local authority gets to do that. So, in fact, if we say we haven't just driven decision-making from London to Cardiff, what actually is true is that lots of decision-making is actually taking place around Wales, all around Wales. So, because we have these variations in the structure, and further, what I noticed in 2002-04, how are they going to implement practice on the ground when it depends on the police and it depends on local magistrates? So one of the discourses that is emerging now, and there may be some political leverage going on, is that Wales has just produced a green paper and a white paper, in which what they've been saying is, well, the problem is there is actually so much diversity in Wales that this diversity is not simply responding to the diverse needs of rural-urban differences, but it's also lack of quality. So they say, well, we've got Swansea and we've got triage in Cardiff, very good initiatives, but that depends on relationships with local police that are not reproduced all around Wales. We have some very good examples of low custody levels, where that low custody level is dependent on a very good negotiated relationship between the youth offending team and the lay magistrates, because we find that where lay magistrates believe in youth offending teams as sources of real expertise, they tend not to send people to custody. Whereas if you talk to lay magistrates who see them as being wishy-washy social workers who know nothing, then relatively high rates of custody. So I'll come back to outcomes in a minute. But anyway, the idea is, well, negotiation might not turn out to be such a wonderful thing if you have diversity. And it might not be something that really produces something that we can say is dragonised, in the sense that here we have a policy that applies at the level of Wales, which doesn't apply at the level of England. Okay. So, and that comes out in outcomes. Okay. You'll have to take my word for this. I didn't want to put too many statistics in. But we can see, if you look around Wales, the rate of use of custody varies enormously in ways that can't be justified but in terms of input, as far as we can tell. But the same is true in England. The same is true of diversion. Levels of diversion vary throughout Wales and throughout England. And so, one of the arguments is that actually the key variables, or the key of practice, seem to actually be too localised to be described as something that could be the evidence of dragons. It's local. It's more local than that. So I have a degree of scepticism. So what were we originally looking to try to look at? Firstly, what is the explanatory power of seeing things as driven down, top down, or negotiated? What is distinctive about Wales? And is negotiation good or bad? Or should we be saying, okay, negotiation is great, top down is bad? Well, clearly, the evolved structure provides another opportunity for negotiating policy making, bringing practice much closer to policy. And we might well see that to be a good thing. But of course, there is also an argument that this produces a kind of policy shield for yacht managers who don't want to follow the Welsh government line, who simply say, well, we have to follow the Youth Justice Board line, so you can play off the two sources of authority. Clearly, it isn't a top-down model. Okay, I think that's the first thing to say. But on the other hand, it may be that what this suggests is that seeing it in terms of so we need to go back to the first thing there, or the second bullet point. The key thing to remember is that there are limited powers of direction in youth justice between different institutions. So we start with our coordinate structures, and we have to remember why do we have, for example, key performance indicators? Why do we have the new public management? Why do we try to influence people indirectly by these levers? Exactly one of the reasons is we can't tell anybody what to do. I mean, that's the core starting point. And I think if we want to analyse and capture the diverse range of policy making and relationships with practice, it may be that this kind of dichotomy we start with, the top-down or negotiated from the bottom, is not a great way of seeing it. So one of the ways that I haven't had much time to think about this is to try and start thinking about youth justice as being formed by policy networks. And there is work by a man named Rhodes in which he's working on the relationship between local and national government. And he's trying to get away either from the idea that you drive down or that everyone's equal. And so what he says is, well, you should probably look at the way in which policy emerges as, in a way, a kind of interplay between interdependent units, in which the outcome is a complex result of the resources that different agencies have. And the ones he picks out are legal and constitutional. What do you have the power to do? And of course, that's one of the things that's looked absent here, that you don't have the power to dictate practice. Hierarchical within an organisation. These are all different organisations, so none of them can tell the others what to do. So it's about financial levers. What does that say? 5. Okay. No, I should be even quicker than that. So it's about using financial levers. The Youth Justice Board can offer grants, not just for particular projects, but also they are offering set grants. So too the Welsh Government. So there are mixed funding, so that gives them both some kind of lever on what happens. If yachts want to do their own thing, then formally they couldn't be told, let's say, do we want to participate in an initiative which involves the use of psychologists in evaluation? Let's say we invented that. Do yachts have to do it? Yachts can say, no, we don't want to do it because nobody can tell us what to do. But if you can use financial incentives, we'll pay for the psychologist. Then you have a key advantage. Political, that he talks about the idea that those who have a political mandate have a special kind of authority because they have a political mandate. The Welsh Government might arguably say that they have a political mandate in relation to Wales, but it's complicated because, of course, the UK Government could say it has a political mandate in relation to the United Kingdom. But also information and expertise. Another thing that the Youth Justice Board Cymru plays with is the idea that you want analysis of what your trends are and where you're going. You want us to help you provide that kind of background research. We're very happy to do that. We're very happy to tell you what your key performance indicators are. So all these various levers of influence. And I suppose one of the things that interests me is how far the picture in the Netherlands or in Italy or in France would be different, where you have a figure who is the juge des enfants, or if you like, the judge who is the youth justice magistrate, who has a degree of control and direction, the legal capacity to say to social workers, go and do this for me, and they can't, they don't have to negotiate that. So I can see that there might be real differences between Anglo-American societies, Anglo-American systems, and continental systems. And I suppose what I'm saying reluctantly to my Welsh colleagues, a couple of them are very keen on the idea, we are learning to do this wonderful new thing with welfare and rights, and we're being very, very different. Well, the problem is, it seems to me that all this kind of institutional independence actually makes it very difficult even to have a policy at the Welsh level. And it's the very fragmentation of the system which makes that difficult. And so there's a sense in which we may be telling ourselves a story, and probably a story which has some kind of cohering power amongst these 18 yachts. You talk to them about England, and they say, "Oh, England," And you think, well, have you actually read the evidence about what, they're not so punitive in England. That welfare is something that's very important. No, we're Wales. So there may be a sense in which we're telling ourselves a story, a useful myth, if you like, about how we are different from this nasty neoliberal other, which may actually help us in this negotiating process to get a greater degree of coherence. I suppose the last thing is that I started out with the idea, well, I like the idea of negotiated practice. Policymakers and practitioners, lots of discretion down there, and sort of. But actually, the difficulty is, how do you tell the difference between what is policy or practice that has been negotiated on the ground in the light of local needs, and basically a policymaker or a practitioner over there doing their own thing badly, and how do you get that balance? So I've kind of cured myself of this kind of stereotype that top down is that there's no place for common standards, if you like, and the implementation of common standards. And so we're going to be in a paradox, which is that there have now been a recommendation that we should fully devolve youth justice, so that the Youth Justice Board powers in relation to youth justice will come to Cardiff. Now, one of the things that might do is it might give Cardiff the levers to actually create a dragonised, a really Welsh, distinctively Welsh youth justice. But of course, we might need to be careful about what we wish for, because I spoke to the head of the Youth Justice Board, Cymru, and said, do you think this would be a good thing? And he said, no, it would be a really bad thing, and it would be a really bad thing because the Welsh Government would become responsible for youth offending. And all we would need is somebody stabs somebody in a school, at a Cardiff school, and suddenly the Welsh Government has to respond directly to a political challenge. So at the moment we're very good. This kind of rather complex blurring of lines leaves the politics up there and the practice being negotiated a long way away from it. And if we bring the politics to Cardiff, then we may lose some of our autonomy. So, just to say, the world seems to be very complicated.